Joining us here on our set is author David Horowitz. His newest book is called Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America. David Horowitz, does it feel like the 60s to you right now in America?
No, it feels much worse than the 60s. The 60s, first of all, the big movement of the 60s were the hippies, and they were benign, in my view. They were not really political. But even the left was not as violent and fascistic as this left is. I don't recall, it may have happened, but I don't recall a speaker invited to campus being shut down in the way that Charles Murray and Heather McDonald and nothing like what happened to Milo Yiannopoulos, where they destroyed $100,000 worth of property damage, violence, 6 individuals sent to the hospital. This is terrible. And I think it comes from, there's been an encouragement by the Obama administration and the Obama Justice Department of violent people. The civil rights movement now celebrates career criminals. I mean, Freddie Gray, has 30 or more arrests, and he preyed on black people. So why is he a civil rights hero? Why would anybody go out and defend him? And there's no indication that any police were involved in his death at all. So I think things are a lot worse than they were then. The new left was committed until the end of the decade to American ideas, like democracy, like listening to the other side, having respect for difference. Now they preach respect for difference, but they have no respect for people who have different views than they do.
What were you doing in the 60s?
Well, I started the 60s as a radical in Berkeley. I actually got up and gave a speech in the center of the campus denouncing Kennedy's resumption of nuclear testing in the atmosphere. I was hauled into a committee of deans and faculty who said I needed to have permission before I got up and spoke because there might be a riot. And I thought that was crazy, but now I think that was pretty sensible. At least in this climate, it's sensible. Then I went to England and worked for Bertrand Russell, wrote books. Came back and was an editor of Ramparts, the largest magazine of the left at the time. And
today?
We incited things that I'm not proud of.
And today?
Today, I'm a big supporter of Donald Trump, and I think the Democratic Party is a party consumed by hate. Every time a Democrat opens his mouth or her mouth these days, it's an act of character assassination. I think of what they've done to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is one of the half-dozen most decent human beings in the United States Senate. He was a champion of civil rights when you think about it for 2 seconds, at least 2 seconds. He was the Attorney General in a deep South state, Alabama, which is where the civil rights movement began. He prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan. He sent a Ku Klux Klan leader to his death for committing a racial murder. He desegregated the schools, and he defended 3 black voters who were defrauded by NAACP officials. And yet Democrat after Democrat got up and called him a racist. I mean, it's just unconscionable.
How do you go from campus radical to supporter of Donald Trump?
Well, that's a long leap. Well, I left the left when the Black Panther Party murdered a mother of 3 whom I had recruited to do the books for a school that I had raised the money to buy. And when the left was victorious in its fight against America's involvement in Vietnam. And when the left was victorious, the United States withdrew and left the Vietnamese without our protection. The communists proceeded to slaughter 2.5 million poor peasants in Indochina, and there was not a single protest from the left. And I realized the left was never an anti-war movement. It was an anti-American movement, and it's remained that to this day. That's what motivates it. It hates America.
David Horowitz, you've brought up race a couple of times, or racial issues in your new book, Big Agenda. You write that Republicans need to direct their arrows at the Achilles heel of the Democratic Party, its monopoly control of the inner cities of America and its responsibility for the misery and suffering inside them. How do they do that?
Yes, this is a chapter in my book called The Achilles Heel of the Democratic Party. The book is Big Agenda. Democrats have a stranglehold on every major inner city in America. Every killing field, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Ferguson, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., 100% controlled by the Democratic Party and has been for 50 to 100 years. Everything that's wrong with the inner city, the schools that don't teach the kids, where 40% drop out before they graduate and 40% who graduate are functionally illiterate. The catch and release programs, which is how Dwayne Wade's cousin, beautiful mother of 4 children, was killed by 2 felons who shouldn't have been out on the street. Every injustice in the inner city, every oppression of minorities and poor people in the inner city that policy can affect, Democrats and progressives are 100% responsible for. But until Donald Trump, Republicans have been too polite to mention this. I've spent 20 frustrating years trying to get Republicans to in every speech, mention the plight of inner city inhabitants under the heel of the Democratic Party. And until Trump, I couldn't get their attention, but I did get Trump's attention. And he proposed a $130 billion scholarship program for inner city kids. We'll see if we can get that through.
Back to Big Agenda. The movement galvanized by Trump can stop the progressive juggernaut and change the American future, but only if it emulates the strategy of his campaign. Be on offense, take no prisoners, stay on the attack.
Yes. Trump, there was I don't remember, it was the second or third debate, a moment where Trump looked Hillary Clinton in the eye and said, "You are a liar and a crook." There's not a Republican in Christendom, another one, who would ever say that. Yet it was true. She's both. And that cripples the Republican Party. They're always ducking and getting out of the way instead of going at their opponents. He also said, and I think this is tremendously important, he said, you have to understand, Hillary has tremendous hatred in her heart. That's what defines Hillary Clinton, her hatred. And she's named it. Her basket of deplorables is what he's referring to. People who are irredeemable, damned, racist, sexist, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes. There isn't a conservative in this country or a Republican who's been in a debate with a liberal, so-called, over policy who has not also been called by them a racist, sexist, homophobe, Islamophobe. Those are demonizing words. They're designed to drum you out of the human race, is what they are. And if America weren't such a remarkably tolerant, inclusive country, it wouldn't have the effect that it does. But the minute somebody calls you a racist, your humanity is already suspect. And that's all the Democrats do. That's what they do.
Prior to your coming on here, we had an author on who's written a book called Exceptional America, and Mugambi Jue of Stanford Law. And he writes in his book, the issue is not whether Democrats are trying to turn America into Europe, as Republicans have charged. Rather, it is that liberal America is closer to Europe and other parts of the West than to conservative America on many of its political, social, and moral values.
Yeah, they're socialists. I agree.
To a large extent, it is conservative America that is an exception in the modern Western world.
Yeah, but conservative America is what America has been since 1776, and that's the exception. And we are a country based on the accountability of individuals, individual freedom. You judge people on their merits regardless of their origins. The left is driven by identity politics, which is anti-American. It's racist. You judge people on the basis of their skin color. This is what the Democrats believe. On the basis of their gender, on the basis of their sexual orientation. And they have a hierarchy, and they have a phrase for it. People of color. People of color is not even English. We don't say, here's a crayon of color, do we? But if you call people colored people, you're a racist. So what is the ideological function of people of color? Well, if you think about Mexico, it's two main ethnic groups. The descendants of the Spanish conquistadors who slaughtered the indigenous Indians, and the descendants of the survivors of the indigenous Indians, the oppressed. But when they cross the border, they're both people of color, therefore both oppressed, therefore deserving special sensitivities, special privileges. Maharajas in India are people of color. The beheaders, the Islamic beheaders in Raqqa and Iraq, they're people of color. Who's not people of color? The only people in the world who aren't people of color are white people. White people oppressors, white people bad. That is pure racism, and it is the ideology of the Democratic Party today, and that's why so many Americans are turned off it. And that's what I say in my book.
David Horowitz's newest book is called Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America. He's the author of over 30 books, and he is our guest here at the LA Times Festival of Books. 202 is the area code if you want to participate in our conversation. 748-8200. For those of you in the East and Central time zones, 748-8201 if you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. How's President Trump doing?
I think he's doing very well. I mean, he has a lot of problems because he has a Republican Party, which is not the Trump Party. As I say, Republicans for 30 years have been too polite to mention the oppression of blacks in the inner city by the Democratic Party and by progressives generally. And they've been scared to confront Democrats. Why hasn't anybody ever asked Debbie Wasserman Schultz, how can you be a member of a racist party? Why hasn't anybody done that? So,
let's hear what our viewers have to say and want to ask you.
Let me thank C-SPAN for having me on. I'm not going to be on MSNBC. CNN has already said they would never have me, told my publisher. So we have a media, which is not a media anymore. It's just a political weapon for the ideological left.
Have you ever been here to the LA Times Festival of Books?
I have, but I was banned for 10 years by the I think she was the editorial page editor of the paper, Janet Clayton. I complained that there are 500 authors at these festivals, and I could only count at the one that I said this on C-SPAN. I said it was as much a disgrace as UCLA because there are no conservatives on the faculty at UCLA. There were 5 conservatives out of 500 authors, and 2 of them were Charlton Heston and Arianna Huffington. And I counted 3 here, so it hasn't really changed. But I had this hiatus of 10 years as a result.
Well, let's hear from Michael, who is calling in from Galesburg, Illinois. Good afternoon, Michael. Go ahead with your question for David Horowitz.
Yeah, I want him to understand. I live in Galesburg, Illinois. Knox College is a liberal college, and they had Bill Clinton, Obama, Madeleine Albright for their commencement speakers. And this May, they got a new president at Knox College. They're having Ava Longoria, who is a reality star. I wanted to comment on just how far we've regressed. You know, you went from Obama, Clinton to Ava Longoria. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. There's a section of my book devoted to universities. And yes, it's a disgrace. All the commencement speakers are leftists. You can't continue to have a democracy if only one side gets to speak. And 85% of our youth go to public universities. These are taxpayer-supported universities. But it's Republican cowardice and lameness that allows this to happen. There are 33 states where Republicans control the legislatures. I appeal to any chairman of an appropriations committee who's listening to put his thumb on the oxygen tube of the president of those universities and say, I want to see political and intellectual diversity on your faculties, in your commencement speakers, in the books that are assigned. We're sitting on a campus where conservatives have been purged from the university. And what happens is that there's no check. I mean, conservatives aren't always right, and liberals aren't. I hate using the word liberal. They're not liberal. Call them progressives. They're not always right. But how do you have a check on them when everybody agrees with everybody? You don't. And so the university faculties have been dumbed down. There are so many frauds now who have professor titles and have captive audiences and indoctrinate them. It's grotesque. I was a Marxist when I went to college in the 50s. I never knew the politics of my professors. They never said anything political in class. And yet you never knew what their positions were, because whatever position a student took, they take the opposite to teach you how to think and how to argue. And that's disappeared. I mean, it's a national tragedy. And I hold the Republican Party responsible for not bringing this up all the time. And they have the power to do something about it.
Jerry, Crane, Texas. Good afternoon. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. David Horowitz. Man, what a pleasure. Sir, I want to thank you for your courage and your bold, profound truth that you bring forth. And please, I know you won't surrender, no matter how many names you're called. Those names that represent that the pathetic left has lost the argument. Sir, my question is, do you still plan to pursue speaking on college campuses? And secondly, I thank God for C-SPAN and Lou Dobbs, otherwise we wouldn't see you. And I think I saw you on Hannity once. But as far as CNN and MSNBC, who I also watch, I never see you there. You kind of scratch the surface on this, but can you give us some anecdotal context as to perhaps why or what has transpired there and why they've blacklisted you? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your kind words. But I tried to speak at Berkeley. I was invited to speak at Berkeley on April 12th, but the university shut me down as they're trying to shut down Ann Coulter. But this is going to be a big battle, and I think that the left has gone a bridge too far this time, and there are actually Democrats like Willie Brown who have come out condemning this, and I think we'll see more of it. I've spoken to left-wing audiences at this LA Book Festival, and they are not happy with what the left is doing on the campuses. So I think they've just overdone it, which is good. I'm banned at CNN, and I'm effectively banned at MSNBC. They can't handle somebody who will go in their face and talk to them the way they talk to everybody else. It's as simple as that. And I would not advise the Republican Party to try to do something about NBC or ABC, because we want an independent media. And, the media now has sort of given itself over to the Democratic Party, but it was a voluntary act on their part, and it's going to have to come from within that they decide to do something else. But of course, I'm not going to stop fighting. What's more important is that people like Steve Miller are a lot younger than I am, and nobody's going to stop them.
David Horowitz, who invited you to speak at UC Berkeley, and how did you
College
get refused?
Republicans.
Would you have attended?
Oh yeah, no, I talked to the vice chancellor and the police chief, a man named Alex Yao. I mean, he should be fired for this, but he said, oh, there's a security problem. I'm not the security problem. The security problem is the left. I said you could solve the security problem by calling in these leftist organizations and just telling them, if you obstruct or threaten a speaker or commit an act of violence, we're going to take away your recognition for a year and your funding, and you won't have an organization on campus. They weren't interested in that. What this police chief said was, the students, I had to speak at a site off campus, a mile away from the campus. It's called the Clark Kerr campus, but it's a mile away from the actual campus. It used to be the school for the deaf, which is perfect. Then he said, you can't advertise the location of the speech. I said, are you kidding? You're going to invite a conservative to campus, but then hide him? And unfortunately, he's making the rules there, this guy Yao. So what's needed is a large protest from people who are liberal Democrats against this. It's a threat to our democracy.
Robert, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, you are on with author David Horowitz.
Sir, kind of hard to see him talking, and I'm talking too. But to Mr. Horowitz, why did they ban you? You know, a lot of people whom I know also call you a bigot.
Well, you know the wrong people. Yeah, I was called, to show you how bad things are. The head of the Student Workers Union, a UAW union, sent an email around saying that I should be denied a platform at Berkeley because I'm a promoter of racial purity and a white nationalist. I have 5 grandchildren. 3 of them are black. 1 of them is Filipino. I marched in my first civil rights march in 1948, probably before even you, sir, were born. I've had a public life all my life. My record on civil rights is clear. I'm very proud of it. Nothing in it would describe me as a white nationalist. These are fascists, and a lot of well-meaning people are fooled by them and listen to them. When you have the Democratic leadership calling Jeff Sessions a racist, you have a national problem. People don't think that Chuck Schumer is a liar. And people on the left don't think, as I do, that Chuck Schumer is a liar and a racist, which he is. So they take his word. So somebody like Jeff Sessions is now tarred and feathered.
The first 100 days of the Trump presidency, you've got your own first 100 days in Big Agenda. Executive orders, TPP, RIP, restore Guantanamo, relocate America's embassy in Israel, Keystone XL pipeline, nixing amnesty, and defund sanctuary cities. How's the track record on your first 100 days so far?
I think he's doing very well. As I say, his biggest problem is the Republican Party. He doesn't have a party that's with him on these issues. He has a party of cowards who are afraid to fight these issues. Sanctuary cities are criminals. The mayors need to be prosecuted, the city councils. The sanctuary cities movement was started by the pro-communist, pro-terrorist ACLU, a defender of the Guantanamo terrorists, a defender of Samuel Arian, supporter of Castro's Cuba. That's the leadership of the ACLU. And they and I write about this in Big Agenda, this book that I've written about Trump. They say explicitly it was designed to thwart the Patriot Act, to prevent the Department of Homeland Security from doing its job. Why? Because they identified with the terrorists because the terrorists are people of color. That's crudely put, but it's 95% accurate. Why is there all this sympathy? Why are Muslims confused with terrorists by leftists? I mean, I'm attacked as an anti-Muslim. I've written maybe 300,000 words about Islam and terror. Not one sentence that I've ever written can be called anti-Muslim. And if you look at the sites that call me anti-Muslim, they don't quote anything that I've said because it doesn't exist.
Next call for David Horowitz comes from Larry in Oxnard, California. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you. Even with slight disagreements at times with you, Mr. Horowitz, I'm so glad you're out there speaking. And one thing I should say, I think President Bush attacking the soft bigotry of low expectations and people like Speaker Ryan, who went around with Neighborhood Enterprise, Bob Woodson, to get real solutions for the poor. They, like President Trump, have tried to attack what the left done in the inner city and with the poor. Also, too, they've had a lot of evangelical support, as has President Trump. What's your analysis of his connection with evangelicals, and where do you see it coming, even concerning his agenda? Thank you so much.
Well, I don't have any special insight into his relations with the evangelical community. One thing I can tell you from my contacts with the evangelical and with the religious right is that they're a lot more intelligent than Democrats or media anchors give them credit for. Not everything Trump does will please them, but they understand that his fight is their fight. It's a fight to return power to the states, to local communities, to get Washington off everybody's backs. And I don't agree with you about Paul Ryan and George Bush. What they're doing is very good in terms of Ryan and Woodson and the soft bigotry of low expectations. But it's not attacking the Democrats. The Democratic Party is a racist party with its boot heels on the necks of poor black and Hispanic people across this country. The main victims of illegal criminals' crimes are probably Hispanic. But we can't even get the statistics on that because the Obama Justice Department was so racist, it makes Hispanic people, white people, so that you can seal how many crimes are committed from the Hispanic community. I don't want to say anything that would even sound negative about Hispanics. They're the backbone of our military. They're a patriotic community. But when you have people crossing the border illegally, when criminals see an opportunity to come to America and prey on people and take advantage of all the goodies that we hand out, you got a serious problem. And people who don't want America to have borders, Mexico has the tightest borders you can imagine for their country. When you have people who don't want America to have borders, these are anti-Americans. That's what they are. And they need to own up to that.
From page 26 of Big Agenda, David Horowitz writes, the real effect of calling people racist is to drum them out of the company of decent people and to stigmatize them as extremists, social outcasts, and unsuitable to participate in any legitimate conversation.
It's the chief weapon of Democrats and leftists. They call you a racist, and that ends the argument. And the only answer to that is go right back at them, fight fire with fire. Democrats are racist, and it's easy to show. They are. If you're a drug dealer who's, selling poison to poor people in the inner city, and you happen to be black, you're oppressed, you're a victim. We're going to give your family $5 million when you bang yourself to death in some police van where there's no cop even present in the van. It's unbelievable.
Ted is in Beckley, West Virginia. And Ted, you're on Book TV with David Horowitz.
Well, thank you very much. I've been listening to C-SPAN for a long time, and I feel very blessed to have been educated by so many people taking so many pictures inside of the meetings and on the floor of Congress and everything. I thank you very much. Also, to have a chance to actually ask a question to David Horowitz. I've seen you many times. The question I have is this. Do you feel that it is moving toward almost a treasonous situation for the gerrymandering to be occurring in this country when it affects directly and badly the votes that are cast in different states? And that's also, I was very disillusioned by Hillary Clinton having 400 votes that were rock solid, even though she had all those scandals. That was ridiculous. And I'm very afraid of Trump. Thank you.
I don't know why you would be afraid of Trump. He's obviously an American patriot. And he obviously cares a lot about his own reputation. I mean, he puts his name on all his buildings, and he buys an airline, it's the Trump Airlines. So he's going to try to do the right thing. So I wouldn't be frightened of him. I think I share your high opinion of C-SPAN. And I've pointed this out to C-SPAN audiences before, but C-SPAN was created by a Nixon Republican, Brian Lamb. Could not have happened. You would not have a fair channel like this. Nobody ever complains about the bias of C-SPAN, but it took a Nixon Republican to do that. And that's why I'm a Republican. It's the American way. That's what I understood growing up to be the American way.
Ted also talked about gerrymandering.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an old corruption. I wouldn't call it treason. Look, we live in a society that reflects our failings as human beings. People are greedy, they're self-centered, they're deceitful. So, what would you expect? That's why we have a system of checks and balances. And how the gerrymanders have gotten away with this, would require an expert, which I am not in this. It's an ongoing battle. If you want to talk treason, people are for open borders. That's treason. You can't have a country if you don't have borders. But I'm just repeating there what Trump has already said.
What's a red diaper baby?
I am a red diaper baby. My parents were card-carrying members of the American Communist Party, which means they were part of an international conspiracy to cause America to lose the Cold War with Soviet Russia. That was orchestrated, this movement from Moscow. That's a red diaper baby. I grew up at some point.
What kind of work did your folks do?
They were high school teachers.
Next call for David Horowitz is John in Berwick, Pennsylvania. Hi, John.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm a registered Republican and a veteran, and I certainly have a much different opinion of being a Republican and being a patriot than this gentleman does. Obviously, he believes that someone who went before the draft board 5 times and said they could not serve the United States military is a patriot. Obviously, he believes somebody that went before a bankruptcy judge and declared bankruptcy 6 times and then went out and bragged about that he had $10 billion is a patriot. Obviously, he believes somebody that refused to pay taxes for at least 20 years, in spite of the fact that Trump was taxed at 8%. 8% is the state tax on casinos in New Jersey. The casinos in Pennsylvania are taxed at 55%. That's 8% in New Jersey, 55% in Pennsylvania. There has not been a casino ever gone bankrupt in Pennsylvania. Trump filed for bankruptcy at every single one of his casinos, his 4 casinos in New Jersey. And as far
All right, John, let's get an answer from our guest, David Horowitz.
It's okay. You're a Trump hater. I don't know that these facts are facts. Bankruptcy is complicated. It's a part of American law. He lost $1 billion. The way I see it is, here's a man who's faced adversity and recovered from it. He's not a criminal. He hasn't been charged as a criminal, so I don't know what you're talking about.
What about deferments from the Vietnam War?
I don't know the circumstances of his deferments or what was going on at the time. I mean, you know, the Democratic Party voted for the Iraq War, sent our young men and women into harm's way, and then turned around 180 degrees and attacked and sabotaged the war for 5 years. That's treasonous. You know, whatever your views of the Iraq War, what the Democrats did was treasonous. And the Bush people just didn't fight them politically.
David Horowitz, do you talk with any of your old friends from the 60s?
Yeah, I met Bob Scheer here. We had a good time. We're old geezers now. So our battles, which were pretty serious when we were younger, are way in the past. I had a good time with him.
Prior to his death, had you talked with Tom Hayden?
I saw Hayden once. Tom, he had a very bad second half. Well, I think his whole life was bad. He was a very dishonest person. He was an America hater. He never learned. He manipulated people. He put them in harm's way and hid himself. He is the author of the riot at the 1968 Democratic Convention, but he was in hiding. He had other people get there. And he once said to me, he said, David, what we have to do is we have to lure middle-class students into situations where the police will crack their heads and make them radicals. I was horrified. So I don't have anything nice to say about Tom Hayden.
David Horowitz's autobiography, Radical Son, A Generational Odyssey, came out in 1997. Van is calling in from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Hi, Van.
Hi, Mr. Horowitz. Has President Trump read your book? And also, do you think that he's going to be able to stand the pressure, the onslaught for the next 4 years that he's been under for the first 100 days? Thank you.
That's the $64,000 question right there. I don't know whether he's read the book or not. My book is really a guide for the grassroots. It's how to fight the Democrats, how to fight these battles. I think Trump is a very tough guy. He's a guy who's been through tremendous adversity. He's had to fight other tough guys, unions, casino rivals, you know. So I've got enough confidence that he's going to stay the course. But I think it's a tougher battle than he ever imagined it would be.
John's calling in from Scottsdale, Arizona. Go ahead, John.
Well, thanks for taking my call. Name calling. Mr. Horowitz just called a person a Trump hater. Now that gets close to calling a person a racist. I mean, a lot of name calling going on by this gentleman, but I have a question. And my question deals with this notion of power going back to the states. Number one, if power had gone back to the states in 1865, we'd still have slavery, Mr. Horowitz. And the question becomes this. If this nation was built on individual work, on solid people going out there as individuals and making their way, how in the hell do you explain slavery? Now, you get into name calling, you call people names, then you complain about people using the word racist. I don't think you're a racist, but I do think you're a hypocrite.
You have no idea what racism is if you think calling somebody a Trump hater is comparable to calling somebody a racist. That's individual accountability is what it is. And what his comments were about individuals. The United States inherited slavery from the British Empire. In one generation, the United States liberated the slaves. Slavery existed for 3,000 years with nobody ever calling it immoral. Not Jesus, not Mohammed, certainly not Mohammed, not Moses, nobody until white Christians in England, led by Wilberforce, called it immoral. And America's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, declared all men created equal, all endowed by God with inalienable rights to liberty. And as I say, it was a little over a generation because people died younger in those days. At the cost of 600,000 American lives, every black in America owes their freedom to America. So I have no apologies to make for our country. Our country stood for the principle of individual liberty and made great sacrifices to realize it. And we now have the most inclusive, most tolerant, most equal society on the face of the earth.
Back to your first 100 days of the Trump agenda, judicial appointments, Supreme Court. How did you do on Neil Gorsuch?
It did great. And the Democrats have overplayed their hand so greatly. I mean, I'd be very surprised if Republicans don't sweep the 2018 elections. The next Supreme Court justice that Trump appoints will be very conservative. For Democrats who voted, all 100 senators voted, and I don't know how many Democrats there were 10 years ago, to confirm him on an appeals court. And then they're dredging up all these reasons to filibuster him. Well, I mean, what does that do to the credibility of Democrats? I mean, any person who's not a religious Democrat, religiously committed to the Democrats, must be scratching their heads over that one.
Countermand the Affordable Care Act. We've had one debate on health care.
Well, to me, this is another one of my problems with Republicans. They talk like accountants. The Democrats are always indicting them morally. You're racist, sexist, homophobe. Republicans say your programs cost too much. You're not going to win that argument politically. The problem with Obamacare was it was an assault on individual freedom. You can't choose your doctor. You can't choose your plan. You can't decide on your own health care. It is so destructive to individual liberty and to individual survival. Very difficult to replace once you get one of these entitlement programs in place. Very hard to dismantle, but I hope they succeed.
John is calling from Westlake Village, California, here in the Southern California area. Hi, John.
Hello, Mr. Horowitz. You've acknowledged thus far that I guess you were brought up a communist. In the 1950s and 60s, you were, I guess you would acknowledge that you were a radical leftist. You were a close associate of the Black Panther Party and a close friend of Huey Newton. You seem to be unable to get along with people very long. You've been married 4 times. You now become, at some point, the bag ripped and you became a right-winger, and you're now a radical right-winger. My question is, how can we how can we trust your judgment about any issue?
Well, okay, you've attacked me, but you're obviously totally ignorant of my life story, which I have written in a book called Radical Son and in other books. First of all, I was married for 20 years to my first wife, the mother of my children. I've been married for 23 years to my present wife. In between, when the Black Panther Party murdered my friend, and I felt, and all my friends, all my progressive friends supported the murderers, I went into a personal tailspin. So I'm not going to justify the 2 marriages in the middle, which hardly lasted at all. And I don't think that has anything to do with trusting me. I have written over 1.5 million words on my political positions. I am certainly the only radical from the 60s that I know of. Well, maybe there's one or two other defectors who I made a serious assessment of where they went wrong. If you want to find out why I no longer, why I would no longer be an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War, it's because the left didn't care about the Vietnamese. It was only about bashing America. And when the Vietnamese were being slaughtered by the communists, the left said, go to hell. That's basically what happened. So I have no respect for those leftists, many of whom are leaders of the Democratic Party today, by the way. And why would you trust Bernie Sanders, who's been a lifelong supporter of communist causes? He's been very consistent. But why would you trust anyone who chose to have his honeymoon in Moscow when the Soviet Empire was at its height and slaughtering 40 million people and putting 100 million in concentration camps? That's who the Democratic Party is today. Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee if the crooked Clintons hadn't fixed the primaries with the help of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Donna Brazile. That's the reality. So I make no apologies for having second thoughts.
David Horowitz, the day you came out as a conservative, what was the reaction to some of your longtime colleagues or your parents?
Well,
what do you remember about that day?
My mother believed that family was more important than politics. And I think both my parents were very worried because the Panthers threatened my life after this woman was killed. And they were a vicious gang, and most of the people they murdered were black. But, because I was threatened, they were concerned about it. What was the other part of your question?
The reaction of your friends. What do you remember about that?
I lost every friend I ever had. Every last one of them. Gone. And that's partly what keeps people in the left. You never realize it when you're in a religious movement, which is what the left is. But if you deviate, if you do something politically incorrect and deviate, you're in danger of losing your friends. And believe me, when you're 35 years old, as I was, to lose every friend that you ever had is not easy, especially when you don't know who conservatives are. I mean, maybe they're the bad people that the left claims they are. So I found out that wasn't true, and I've had a good rest of my life here.
David Horowitz's big agenda has been blurbed by Rush Limbaugh, Dinesh D'Souza, Peter Schweitzer, and Ann Coulter. Jacqueline's calling in from Detroit. Hi, Jacqueline. You're on Book TV with author David Horowitz.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I want to say to Mr. Horowitz, you are a brilliant man. I'm an African-American degree, and I just love who you are and what you say. My question is, how were you able to see the insight of how the Democrats just really put black people in slavery, and my people and Nazis Horowitz, and when I try to talk to them, like you were ostracized, I'm ostracized people because I think the way you think, and I thank God for the way you think. You are brilliant, and we love you. So how were you able to see what the Democrats, the African American?
First of all, it's harder to be a black conservative than to be me. So I compliment you on your fortitude. I've been waiting for the black community to liberate itself from the one-party state that it's in. I'm an admirer of Sheriff Clark for that reason, and Clarence Thomas and other black conservatives. I was turned around on civil rights. I understood how bad the civil rights movement had become by reading Thomas Sowell's book, Civil Rights, Rhetoric or Reality. And Thomas Sowell, I think, has been a great guide on racial racial issues for conservatives. Very wise man, unknown to 99% of today's college students because of the leftist stranglehold on our universities.
Mike is calling from Detroit as well. Hi, Mike.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful to listen to you. You know, I was born in 1950, and in grade school, junior high school, you know, our schools were all integrated, and it was really inspiring because my African-American classmates and so on were into the civil rights movement. It was such a positive culture. And if, you know, you can kind of contrast that to the culture now, which is so negative and destructive under the Democrats, you know, it's just really incredible to me.
Well, the civil rights movement was destroyed by Sharpton and Jackson, two race hustlers and extortionists who, you know, lined their own pockets by attacking white people, basically, and holding white companies to ransom. I mean, it's a terrible thing that the civil rights so-called left has done. To tell young black people that the system is rigged against you is to deny them incredible opportunities that this country affords. I mean, just think of it. Snoop Doggy Dogg was a criminal in Compton. Now he's, you know what, he must be worth $200 million, and he's a talented comedian, actually. It's a great country. Just a great, great country, and the left is systematically attempting to destroy it. And the censorship issue is huge. Censorship of conservative views. You know, my book is like 10 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, but totally blacked out in the pages of the New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post. This is the literary culture. I haven't had a book reviewed in the New York Review of Books since 1985, when I made the indiscreet took the indiscreet step of saying I had voted for Ronald Reagan. And that's it. That was enough to get me made an unperson.
From Big Agenda, page 146, it is unconscionable that K through 12 children should be indoctrinated at taxpayers' expense in the anti-American prejudices of the political left. It is an outrage that universities have purged conservatives from their faculties and reading lists, and that conservative speakers should require bodyguards and campus security to ensure their safety when they speak. Just a few minutes left with our guest. Let's work in Jonathan in Kerrville, Texas. Hi, Jonathan.
Greetings from the Hill Country. A privilege to talk to you, Mr. Horowitz. Just two quick questions, if I may. First, President Obama left behind a lot of moles, trolls, and loyalists in the various agencies of government. Any ideas on how to eject them? And number two, reference George Soros. Why hasn't a Hungarian Holocaust survivor or the heir or grandchildren of one of these survivors ever sued George Soros for his role as a Nazi collaborator and sending his kinsmen, his countrymen to the camps? I'll wait for my answer.
Well, all right. Well, I think the latter is probably really difficult. He was 17 years old and accompanying his father in confiscating the property of Jews who were being sent to the gas chambers. That's the problem there. And I think Trump has advisors. Steve Bannon would be a good example who can identify and ferret out Obama loyalists. That's an inside Washington issue. And as far as I'm concerned, and my life has been spent doing, and even this book about Trump, is the conservative grassroots has to rise up. When I came to the right, as a leftist, as a former leftist, I said, where's the ground army? Where are the activists? Where's the student organizations? Not until the Obama presidency has the right risen at the grassroots level. The great thing about Trumpism is that it's a grassroots movement. It's ordinary people. You've got to do this at the local level. The K-12 schools are now sites of indoctrinating kids from the kindergarten up. We need a code of ethics. If there are Republicans, we just go to your state legislators and say we need a code of ethics for K-12 teachers that will prevent them from indoctrinating students, from taking positions on controversial issues. They can teach the controversies, but they can't advocate for any side, whether it's the right or the left, in a K-12 classroom. Let's get a law and let's take away their teaching licenses if they do that.
Glenda in Lakewood, Washington, you have the last word.
In a K-12 classroom.
Hey, you know what, Glenda? Tell you what, we're going to have to hang up on Glenda, and let's hear from David in Santa Barbara, California. David, you are on the air. Please go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
Yes, I'd like to compliment you. I saw your booklets at a Tea Party, the small booklets are donation only at Tea Party events, and they're real informative. And I'd like to ask if you're acquainted with Curtis Bowers, who taped, infiltrated a Communist Party meeting and it came up with 2 tapes called Agenda and Agenda 2, Masters of the Sea. It's very informative too, that viewers should see.
I'm not familiar with those tapes, but look, the Communist Party isn't important. What's important is the communist idea. People on the left are part of a crypto-religious movement. They believe that the world can be redeemed, the planet can be saved, and the world can be redeemed. And they see themselves as the redeemers. And that means that they are willing to use the power of the state, of the federal government, to impose their views on everybody else. That's why they're so dangerous. It's that idea that we have to confront, not a political party, not a particular organization. It's the idea that you can have social justice. How can you have social justice when the people administering it are going to be the same people that are corrupting it? Society, there is no society outside of the individuals who make it up. There are only social justice is just the rule of whoever is politically on top. And the problem, the root cause of all social problems is us. It's our greed, our egotism, our insensitivity. And it's a fight in every generation to maintain civilization and democracy. Reagan said freedom is only one generation away from barbarism if we don't fight for it.
David Horowitz's most recent book, just out this year, Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America, and he's been our guest for the past hour on Book TV.